Good morning. How's everybody this morning? You all here for the class on how to get rich in real estate without really trying? Wrong class. This is the one on the ethics. This is the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics. They say you must have ethics every 3 years. Now, you don't have to have ethics in between there, but you got to have them every 3 years. So this is this particular class. It's a 2.5-hour class. This meeting is being recorded. Okay, we're recording the meeting, so if you want to listen to it again, you can. The biggest problem is that the National Association of Realtors requires that you be in attendance 90% of the time. Now, I'm having a little trouble with my audio, and we put you all on mute. If you do have if you're having any problem, just go ahead and put it into the chat. If you have a question, put it in the chat, and we'll go ahead and get that taken care of. So let me tell you a little bit about who I am. My name is Joel Carlson. Here's my contact information. Call me, text me, email me. I am happy to answer any of your questions. I've been teaching this class since 1996 when the California Association of Realtors decided they're not going to do it anymore. They're going to sell the program to other instructors. I am the owner-broker of MJC Realty. I have 3 offices, one in Newport Beach, one in Huntington Beach, and one in Seal Beach. I like the beach. I am also an instructor for many moons for the California Association of Realtors, teach all the designation classes, and particularly the BRBC at this moment in time, how it conjoins with the RLA, Residential Listing Agreement, because you can represent both and be paid by both. You just have to have 2 separate agreements. And then top of page 2 of the purchase agreement, paragraph 3 down. I'm also a designated instructor from the National Association. So that's why I teach this particular class. I also teach this class for your people that are on the grievance committee, professional standards committee, arbitration committee, and your board of directors. I've done that for many years with your association. And as a senior instructor for Revy, that's the one that can get you your 45 hours of continuing education in 3.5 minutes. Haven't figured that one out yet. Oh yeah, it's home study, that's it. All right. And I'm also a certified real estate consultant from the American College. I just wanted more alphabet soup after my name, so I got another designation. Actually, the reason I got that designation is part of the class we're doing today. We're talking about buyer representation broker compensation. And basically, I wanted that designation so that I could go ahead and use that form. I've been using the BRBC since 1987. And I'll give you some history on that as we go along here. So again, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. If you have questions concerning technical stuff, Wendy will take care of that. If you have questions for me, and you say, Joel, I don't have any questions right now, but I'll have questions later. Here's my contact information. Write it down, contact me, email me. I'm happy to get back to you, but remember, I'm a baby boomer. That means if you call me, I'll get back to you in a couple of weeks. If you email me, it might be a little sooner. If you text me, it'll probably be a little sooner also. So that's just how that stuff works. All right, let's talk about the DRE requirement. This is not the DRE requirement. The Department of Real Estate requires 3 hours of continuing education every 4 years. This is not that class. That particular class covers the business, the 10176, 10177 of the Business and Professions Code. What we're going to be talking about today is the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics. But before we get into that, I want to make sure those of you who are on the Grievance Committee, Pro Standards Committee, if in fact there is a violation of intentional fraud, negligent misrepresentation, or negligence, it is not going to be heard by any of the committees that we talk about at our association. Okay? What you're going to do is you're going to be reporting to the Department of Real Estate, and they're going to take care of it. We do not take care of any violations of law. We do have one area, though, that is covered several times in our Code of Ethics, and that is agency. Your agency duties in the state of California have been around since 1988. And we have a form for it. I'm going to go through that form with you because At this moment in time, this is the number one reason that we're going to ethics violations, one, two, legal violations. So I want to make sure we cover the ethics portion as well as how it adheres to our agency duties. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the agency disclosure. This is the agency disclosure form. This form has been law in the state of California since 1988. Now, what's interesting to me is we had this settlement in Missouri, and we have to use the buyer representation broker compensation agreement. Just to let you know, that has been in zip forms for over 30 years. And in 96, 98, right around in there, my office policy was, if you want to buy real estate from us, you sign a buyer representation broker compensation agreement. And let me tell you why. How many of you have ever had a buyer walk into your office, say, hi, I want to buy real estate? You showed them everything in the multiple listing and they bought through somebody else. You all been in the business more than 15 minutes. Well, after that happened a number of times, I said, you know what? The next time somebody wants to pick my brain and waste my time, I'm going to charge them, just like any other professional would. You see, I call you real estate professionals because you are defined as such in our code of ethics from the National Association of Realtors. And you're also defined as real estate professionals in our state constitution. Yeah, believe it or not, we have a constitution here in California. It was codified in 1879. It says if you have a state issued license, that's the DRE, and a requirement of continuing education, that's 45 hours every 4 years, you are considered a professional. As professionals, are we held to a higher standard? Absolutely. Then I want to be compensated at that higher standard. So my office policy has been since the 1990s. You walk into my office, say, I want to buy real estate. I say, terrific. The first half hour is free. After that, you either sign a buyer representation agreement or a fee agreement. If you won't do that, don't let the door hit you on the way out. See, I've gotten old and grumpy. I don't have to put up with the boneheads anymore. Okay? As a policeman, Huntington Beach. Did I arrest you? Once upon a time, you might have. When I was a kid, we worked the Huntington Beach area quite a bit. Anyway, so what I want you to understand is this particular class is in our code of ethics, but it's also one of the greatest areas that we get in violation of law here in the state of California and its agency. So I want to go through those 3 steps. It's as a C.A.R. instructor, I get all the court cases we're losing. And those court cases where we're getting ourselves in trouble is we are not following this area right here to both buyer and seller, to both buyer and seller. Now, this is a 3-step process. This is a disclosure, which means it's probably required by law. Well, this one is required by law. The law is right down here. It's 2079 in Civil Code. In little tiny print, nobody ever reads, but I've read it as a C.A.R. instructor because it is important that you, as a real estate professional, understand exactly what you're doing in this situation, not only for the state of California, but also for ethics as far as the National Association of Realtors is concerned. So this form is mentioned, this process that we use in California, and we've been using since 1988, is mentioned in our code of ethics 3 times. Now, we got to do some history here because I got to make sure that you understand. There was a court case in Missouri, and there was a settlement with the court case and the Department of Justice. The National Association of Realtors said, you members of the National Association of Realtors must use a BRBC, Buyer Representation Broker Compensation Agreement. Each state had to submit that to the Department of Justice and have it approved. That's why we always renew, we always have our forms, the zip forms redone June of each year. We had to go to July because there was 11 forms that DOJ made us redo and push back to them so that they could approve them. So let's go back to 1620. In 1620, the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock. It brought with it English common law. English common law says you cannot represent both buyer and seller. They use a two-party debt instrument called a deed of trust. Excuse me, called a mortgage. Mortgagor, mortgagee. And their community property laws are different. In California, we are under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. In 1848, the United States of America received the Western United States in a treaty from Mexico, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And that treaty said we must use Spanish law. Now, Spanish law says you can represent both buyer and seller. We use a three-party debt instrument called a deed of trust: trustor, trustee, beneficiary. And our community property laws are significantly different. So when this court case came about in Missouri, I went, what are they talking about? We've been using this form since 1988. We've disclosed. We had in our listing agreements, this is the commission, excuse me, we can't call it that anymore. This is the compensation that the seller's paying, and a part of that is going to go to the buyer's agent. Other states were not doing that, and that's why the DOJ and this court case was successful. So basically, excuse me, we've been doing all the things that we're supposed to do as real estate professionals in the state of California. We just haven't had a mandate to use the buyer representation broker compensation agreement. So as far as ethics go, when we're talking about agency, and it talks about agency several times in our code of ethics from the National Association of Realtors, it says the agent is a fiduciary. That means you have the highest binding trust to your client. You represent the buyer exclusively, seller exclusively, or both buyer and seller. Where we're getting ourselves in trouble right now is to both buyer and seller. This is a court cases in California. This has nothing to do with the code of ethics, other than if you go to court, you're going to lose your license, not have to worry about the code of ethics. It's right here. Diligent exercise of reasonable skill and care in the performance of your duties. Diligent exercise of reasonable skill and care in the performance of your duties. In other words, what this means is that if in fact you're not knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing, you're in violation of real estate law. I'll give you an example. I'm in Southern California. If I came up to Tulare, to Visalia, to any of those places, Hanford, and I tried to sell real estate, I would be incompetent. I don't know what the city's rules and regs are. I don't know what the county's rules and regs are. So if you go and sell a piece of property someplace you've never sold before, you need to contact the city and say, if I'm a buyer, are there rules and regs for selling one? And I'm only talking about 1 to 4 residential units today. Let me give you my 3 caveats. A caveat is a promise to do or not to do something. Here's all I'm going to do here today. I'm going to talk to you about 1 to 4 residential units and the laws that are ancillary to those. My second caveat is, and there's 3 of them, my second caveat is I will tell you what those laws are. In other words, whether it's business and professions code, civil code, or commissioner's regulations. But my last caveat is the most important, and that is it doesn't matter what I say. It matters what your broker says, because your broker is ultimately liable for whatever you do under 10131 of the Business and Professions Code. So as we go through here today, if I talk to you about things that my office does at MJC Realty, don't go back to your broker and say, Joel said, because then I get in trouble. Just go back and say, hi, I was in class today. What is our policy? How do we represent this company as a real estate professional? And I told you, you're real estate professionals based on our Constitution here in California. So with that in mind, here's the 3 steps. And this is why, and the reason I bring this up is because it's talked about in our code of ethics, but especially it says in your agency disclosure, if you do not follow the 3 steps properly, you are not entitled to a commission. Now, I don't know about you, but that's how I get paid. So when this came out in 88, as an instructor, I've been teaching it since 1988. And right down here, it says, if you, at the bottom, of the second page. This is a 2-page form. It always has the entire code on the back page. And it says right down here, if you do not follow the 3 steps properly, you're not entitled to a commission. So let's make sure we know what the 3 steps are. First step is you got to give them this form. Second step is you have to decide how you're going to represent them. Buyer exclusively, seller exclusively, or both buyer and seller. And the last step is you sign the purchase agreement. Okay? You say, well, when do I give them this form? I am so glad you asked, because it says right here, the last paragraph, you hand this to the buyer, you hand this to the seller, and they read, the law requires each agent, that's you, with whom you have more than a casual relationship, whatever that is, to present you with this disclosure form. You are to give it to them at a specific time. You say, well, how do I know what that time is? You ask your broker, your manager, your team leader. Hi, I was in class today. I learned some stuff. What's a casual relationship? Let me tell you what a casual relationship is at my company, MJC Realty. If you start showing the buyer property, you have formed more in a casual relationship, you give them a copy of this. If you go on a listing presentation, you have formed more than a casual relationship. You give them a copy of this. When you give them a copy of it, it says this is just a disclosure. It does not obligate them to anything. 1, 2, it is not a buyer representation, broker compensation. And 3, it is law here in the state of California that I give this to you. It's under 2079 of the Civil Code. Little tiny print nobody ever reads. Good. So with that in mind, and I see everybody's putting their information into the chat. That's good. We have your names. We're recording your names, and we're going to be able to save the chat. You just go up to, let's see, up to the 3 little dots. No, let's see. Down at the bottom. And you can save the chat. And we're going to be saving the chat so that we have everybody who was in the meeting. We've saved them. So we know who's there. The National Association of Realtors requires that you be here 90% of the time for the 200. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is be here at 1 o'clock. See, it's a 2.5-hour class. So we go 11:30, 12:30, 1 o'clock, we're done. At 1 o'clock, I'm going to show you something that will blow your socks off. Now, that's old school, I know. So let me bring it to modern day vernacular. At 1 o'clock today, or a little bit before, I'm going to strap you to the top of SpaceX, and I'm going to launch you, because I'm going to show you something that you're going to go, right? So stick around till 1 o'clock. So this form must be given at a specific time. The second step in this process is you check boxes. On the second paragraph of the RPA, this is the residential purchase agreement, it says you, by law, must check off boxes. It doesn't matter which boxes you check, you just must check off boxes. Let me tell you what 99% of the brokers do in the state of California. Okay, they check off if ABC Realty represents the seller, they check off they represent the seller. XYZ Realty represents the buyer, they check off buyer. If they represent both, then they check off both. And I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you this is what 99% of the brokers do. You need to verify this through your broker, your manager, your team leader, to make sure that you have complied with those items. Okay, so everybody's here, and you have to stay here. You know, if you're on, you have to stay on. If you go off and you're gone more than 10% of the time, the computer will say you were not here for the class. So you say, well, Joel, I'm out jogging. Okay, just leave it on. Joel, I'm doing other things while I'm doing this. I understand. Leave your camera on so that we can at least see you're there and you didn't go off and take a nap or something. Right? So that's just that's just the National Association of Realtors requirements, that you don't have to take a test. And the test is your real world test of not getting in trouble with the 3 standing committees. So first step is you gave them the agency disclosure form. Second step is you check boxes. It really doesn't matter which boxes you check off. If you read the code, if you read the back of the agency disclosure, it says it doesn't matter which boxes you check off. You just must disclose how you represent the buyer, the seller. That's all. The last step is so important. It's the last page in the purchase agreement. Now, the purchase agreement last week used to be 16 pages, now 17 pages, or about a month ago, changed. We got a 17-page purchase agreement. This is a residential purchase agreement. This is all I'm talking about here today, 1 to 4 residential units. This is your page. This is the broker page, the last page, real estate brokers. And you sign it. You sign it right here, the agent representing the seller, the agent representing the buyer. Now, here's where we're getting ourselves in trouble. This is where we're getting sued. They're coming into, they're lining up in the courts like 747s coming into LAX. Real estate agents are not parties to this agreement. It says it right above your signature. Well, then my question is, why am I signing the dadgum thing? You're confirming your agency relationship. It's a 3-step process. You give them this form once you have formed more than a casual relationship. That's what it says right down here. You then check off boxes as your broker, manager, team leader tells you to do on page 1 of the purchase agreement. And then you sign it. And when you sign it, at the bottom of page 17, you are saying that you represent the buyer exclusively, the seller exclusively, or both buyer and seller. You have complied with the law 2079 of the Civil Code. Now, again, we've been doing this since 1988. Apparently, in Missouri, they don't do things like that because they were under English common law. So there were several court cases. That one is the one that was they did a mass exodus kind of thing and made sure that everybody had to follow the same rules if you are a realtor. This is not state law yet, that you use a buyer representation broker compensation agreement. All right, so if we go back here to the great state of conduct, we're talking about agency duties. Now, the code says under your agency duties, this is 10176, 10177. That's the business and professions code. We're not talking about that today. This says that the real estate commissioner can take your license away for any violation of those items. We're not talking about that today. People get confused. They say, oh, is this the ethics? Do I get ethics for it to renew my license? No, this is to be a member of the National Association of Realtors, a member of the California Association of Realtors, and a member of your local association. So if you violate the commissioner's regulations, anybody know who the commissioner is? Real estate commissioner here in the state of California? Chica, C-H-I-K-I. She's been a real estate deputy at the DRE for many years. When Macaulay, who was our old commissioner, left to go do other things, she took his position. That is an appointed position by the governor. What we're going to talk about from now on is the Code of Ethics, the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, and the things that are going on with those. All right, let me see here. I can hear him perfectly. Good, good, good. I'm just looking at the chat to make sure there's no questions out there yet. I say, oh, Joe, we haven't even got started yet. I know. It's one of those things where I've got to clear this. The National Association of Realtors gives me this slide deck, and I have to use this slide deck as it pertains to our particular code. So the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, the purpose of the code we're going to go over, and it covers Articles 1 through 9, are duties to your clients and customers. Article 1 says something to the effect of, you will not lie, cheat, or steal from your clients. You know, I thought that was pretty clear. We're going to go over each one of these articles. 10 through 14 have to do with duties to the public. Article 10 says you will not discriminate. Article 11 says you will present a true picture in your advertising. Article 12 says if you have an internet presence, you will present a true picture in your advertising. Article 14 says you will cooperate with the two of the three standing committees, the Grievance Committee and the Pro Standards Committee, if you violate the Code of Ethics. The last three have to do with duties to other realtors, 15, 16, and 17. 15 says you won't say bad things about other realtors. Now, it used to say you will not disparage other realtors, but nobody knew what that meant. So now it says you won't say bad things. 16 says you will not interfere with the exclusive right to sell. So if I got a listing on this house over here, you're not going to knock on the door. Hi, listen, I know you're listed with Joel, but he's a bum. Cancel the listing and list with me. That's a violation of your code of ethics. In California, that's a violation of law. It's called restraint of trade. What we're going to find out is that most of the code of ethics are already laws here in the state of California. We just didn't know it. Article 17 says you will cooperate with the arbitration committee. So 16 says you will not interfere with an exclusive right to sell listing. And now you will not interfere with a buyer representation broker compensation agreement. Okay. They're both exclusives. They're in writing, and you, by your code of ethics, will not interfere with those. Our laws say here in the state of California, we will not interfere with those. And 17 says if you have an arbitration, if you're arguing over money, you will submit to arbitration. So we're going to discuss some of the key factors on that. And the idea is there's a difference between ethics violation and arbitration complaints. If you violate the code of ethics, the board or association bylaws or the MLS bylaws, then you will be you'll be contacted by the whoever, and they'll ask for information about that. And then you will go to a hearing. And I'm going to go through that process. If you file an arbitration, that's for money. Realtor A says Realtor B owes them money. They go down to the association, they get what's called an A1. Just a form. It says, here's the reason I think they owe me money. It's submitted to the grievance committee. They look at it to make sure it's not a frivolous, and then it goes to the arbitration committee. There's a grievance committee, a professional standards committee, and an arbitration committee. 3 standing committees. What is the complaint process? Now, here's the complaint process. So Realtor A says Realtor B violated the code of ethics, the board or association bylaws, or the MLS bylaws. You say, wait a minute, Joel, when I joined the association, I had to go through orientation. And in the orientation, they gave us this stuff. Yeah. When was the last time you looked at it? 3 years ago, when I went through this class. Perfect. That's the reason we do the class, because there's been changes to the code of ethics, probably your MLS bylaws because of the court case that went down in Missouri. So you need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. And if you're dealing in residential real estate, 1 to 4, that's all I'm talking about here today, then you need to be knowledgeable about the rules and regs of the city and county. We talked about that, as well as the code of ethics that govern you. And those include understanding your board bylaws and MLS bylaws. You say, I got to copy them around here someplace. Yeah, well, you probably ought to look at them once in a while. And that's why we do this class, to make sure that you have reviewed some of the things that are in there. The grievance committee, then the pro standards committee. So here's what happens. Now, when I started in the real estate business, I came straight out of college. I got my real estate license. I thought somebody had violated the code of ethics. So I went down to the association. They said, oh, well, you need to fill out a D1. Now, nowadays it's called an E1. It's just a form. It was a D1 in those days. I filled it out. I sent it back, and I got a call from the head honcho of the grievance committee. He said, Mr. Carlson, this is not a violation of the code of ethics. And he said, you need to learn the code of ethics. Now that's, kind of embarrassed a little bit here. I'm a realtor and I don't know the code of ethics. So I said, well, how do I learn about these code of ethics in their entirety? He said, you join the grievance committee. I said, okay, fine. I'll join the grievance. I thought, oh, this is perfect. I get to be judge, jury, and executioner on the grievance committee. So the grievance committee is made up of volunteers. They meet on usually a monthly basis, and they go over the code of ethics, the board or association bylaws. We still have some boards of realtors here in California, or the MLS bylaws. So you would go to those classes once a month for about an hour, and we would learn about these different things. Now, on the grievance committee, if in fact there is a E1, that's what they'll file right now. They'll file an E1, Ethics 1. They'll convene the grievance committee. It's just a group of volunteers. And I've talked to many of you up there in past classes, and they will say, okay, fine. We got Realtor A, Realtor B. Realtor A says Realtor B violated the Code of Ethics, the Border Association bylaws, or the MLS bylaws. Okay, Realtor B says, no, I didn't. Fine. The E1 is given to the grievance committee. Grievance committee then selects 3 people, usually. It just has to be an odd number other than 1. And you probably just can't find 5 people who want to sit around, look at a piece of paper and say, yeah, no. So we get 3 people, call it a tribunal. However, you cannot be related by blood or marriage, okay? So the hearing process, you can't be related by blood or marriage to Realtor A or Realtor B. And you cannot be in the same office as Realtor A or Realtor B. It's got to be an odd number other than 1. So it's usually 3. Could be 5, 7, 9. I have never seen in all the years I've been doing this any more than 3. You have a finding of facts on the next committee. So what happens is we're sitting on the professional standards committee. We'll have a finding of facts. On the grievance committee, we look at it and we say, if what Realtor A wrote is true, it is a violation of the Code of Ethics, the Border Association bylaws, or the MLS bylaws. Okay? So that's what we do. Once we've made it determined, yes, it is a violation, one of those 3 items, the Code of Ethics, the Border Association bylaws, remember those, you got them and you never looked at them again, same with me, or the MLS bylaws. And there's been some changey poos in the MLS bylaws, so you need to make sure that you've looked at those. And that's why when I joined the committee, the grievance committee, it was like an educational system. I learned about the Code of Ethics. I learned about our association bylaws, and I learned about the MLS bylaws. So that when we were picked as a tribunal, we sat down and we looked at the E1. We said, yes, that is a violation, or no, it's not a violation, or it needs to be sent back and redone a little bit. Now, once that's done, it goes back to the executive officer. Executive officer calls the next committee. The next committee is the professional standards committee. Typically, they're 2 separate committees. And in some instances, you will only have a grievance committee, and it will be heard by maybe a larger association like Fresno. Okay, so you'll go up to there, and their professional standards committee will be convened. And the professional standards committee, again, these are volunteers. When I was on the grievance committee, and I said, okay, fine, we've got this going. The guy is guilty as all get out. How do we become judge, jury, and executioner? And they said, oh, well, you can't do that at the grievance committee. You have to be on the pro standards committee. They hear the hearing and everything. I thought, oh, okay, I'll join the professional standards committee. So I joined the professional standards committee. We went through all of the, there's forms, there's procedures, there's due process. We learned all of that. And then I was on my first committee. They were going to pick an odd number other than 1, so it's typically 3. And in that particular case, we listen on the professional standards committee, Realtor A, Realtor B. We listen. We don't make the case for them, and we write down a finding of facts. They say something, that's a fact, it's verified, we write that down, because that's going to be the basis of our decision of what we can do or what we recommend be done. We submit that recommendation to the board of directors. Your board of directors is where the proverbial buck stops, and they could do anything. They could say, good job, committee. We'll go with your recommendation. Okay? Bad job. You're going to have to go do it again. Or there's nothing here. Okay, forget about it. Okay, what time frame is a file for the violation? It's 180 days. Somebody asks, well, if I've got a violation, I think, when do you must file it within 180 days, 6 months, basically, okay, in order to have it go through the process. If longer than that, it's too late. You go down to the association, you get an E1 if it's a violation of the Code of Ethics, Border Association bylaws, or MLS bylaws. If you're fighting over money, That's a different committee. I'll go over that in just a second. But this finding of facts is submitted to the board of directors. Your board of directors are your elected officials, and they can do anything. They can say, good job. We'll go with your recommendation. They could say, what a lousy job. Go back and do it again. They could say, well, you did okay, but we're going to change a few things. Your board of directors were voted into office. Now you say, well, I never voted. Well, then be quiet and take your beating. You had an opportunity to vote. You didn't take it. It's one of those things. When I was 18 years of age in the United States of America, I could not vote. When I was 19, they changed the Constitution of the United States saying I could vote. And I voted in every election since then because I have been in 40 different countries in the world. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is the greatest country because one of the benefits is we get to vote. I've been in countries where you vote at the end of an AK-47, that only the elite can vote. So you had a chance to vote for your board of directors. You didn't take it. That's up to you. Now, you say, well, I don't know anything about these people. Call them, read their bios, make a decision based on that. Don't just say, oh, I didn't have time to read. Well, then if you're called before one of the committees and they make a decision, you didn't have any chance to have leadership in your particular association that you thought was okay. Once it's submitted to the board of directors, then they can do anything. Now, the enforcement, the kind of punishment that can be dispensed. So you're found guilty of the code of ethics. You violated the code of ethics. You could be, the recommendation from the professional standards committee could be, you must take a class like this. Maybe some of you are here because you have to be, or you could be fined. And that fine could be as much as $15,000. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to hear about any $15,000 fine. If you violate the board or association bylaws, the professional standards committee could recommend that you be kicked out of the board or association. As I said, we still have some boards of realtors here in California. If you violate the MLS bylaws, they could recommend that you're kicked out of the MLS. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm kicked out of the MLS, I'm out of biz. So that's the one you got to know about. And there's been changes to those bylaws. And your MLS has been giving you classes on these. And just to let you know, there are at least 17 MLSs throughout the state of California. 17 MLSs. So if you say, well, I belong to this MLS, well, that may not be the only one. Okay. So there's other MLSs, multiple listing services out there. If you violate the MLS, you can be kicked out of the MLS, right? The arbitration process works very similar. Realtor A says Realtor B owes them money. Realtor B says, no, I don't. Realtor A goes down to the association and gets what's called an A1. They fill out the A1, they give it back to the executive officer. Executive officer calls the third standing committee, arbitration committee. Again, it's a voluntary committee. And when I went to that particular committee, we went over the process of the hearing and evidence and things like that. And then they gave us something called the procuring cause chart. And I looked at this, I said, whoa, this is what they delineate as to how you get paid. And I made that part of my policy and procedures manual. And I'll show you that form and where you can find it when we go to the California Association of Realtors website. It was just 23 articles, 23 items. And it said, hi, if you do this, you get paid. If you don't do this, you don't get paid. Number 23 was, did you give them an agency disclosure? We just talked about that. That was the first thing we talked about. If you didn't give them one of those, we ain't going to hear it at the committees. It's going to the DRE because you're in violation of real estate law. 2079, the real estate law. So we ain't going to hear that one. If you're a violation of the law, it doesn't go to any of these committees. 19 on the 23. what are called if you're on the arbitration committee, you look at this procuring cause chart. Number 19 says, did the buyer have a buyer representation broker compensation agreement filed with Realtor B or A? Okay, so Realtor A says, you owe me money. Realtor B says, no, I don't. Realtor A says, I'm going to go to the association and fill out an A1. They fill it out. Grievance committee looks at that and says, okay, it's not a frivolous, because some agents just put frivolous hearings together. If you do that too many times, you are going to be called before the professional standards committee, and you might be kicked out of the association for a week, a month, a year, whatever. Just like you could be kicked out of the MLS for a week, a month, a year, whatever. Okay, so with that in mind, on the arbitration committee, you have a hearing. You do the same thing. The grievance committee, they meet, they pick 3, or they pick an odd number other than 1. The professional standards committee meets, they pick an odd number other than 1. The arbitration committee meets, they pick an odd number other than 1. And you cannot be related by blood or marriage. And you cannot be in the same office as Realtor A or Realtor B. Okay, so again, you would sit there, you would listen, and they'd say, here's the reason I think, and you will have your procuring cause chart. And on your procuring cost chart, it's not cumulative, because you could have, out of the 23, you could have 19 of them, and the other person could win that only had 3 or 4. So it's not cumulative. It is, what did you do? First thing is, did you do the agency disclosure? Yes, I did. Did you have a buyer representation agreement? Yes, I did. Then you're going to get paid. So that's why I've been using buyer representation broker compensation agreements since the 1990s, because I want to get paid. So this is nothing new. We just never used it. Okay. So the process works the same. Pick an odd number other than 1, 3 of you. We contact the complainant, we contact the respondent, Realtor A, Realtor B. They say, here's the reason he owes me money. No, I don't. Here, witnesses, cross-examination, evidence. When they're all done, the 3 of us sit here, we go over the testimony we heard, we look at our procuring cause chart, and we make a recommendation. That recommendation goes to the board of directors, and the board of directors can do anything. They can say, good job, bad job, go do it again. Then they could say, we go with your recommendation, because what the arbitration committee does is make a recommendation. All right. And if you disagree with the award, then you can have that portion that you disagree with reheard. So on the professional standards hearing or on the arbitration, you say, I don't think I got due process. Then you could have it reheard, that portion, not the whole thing. You're going to have just that portion reheard. And your privacy is part of our code of ethics. In other words, if somebody says, well, I want to make sure that my privacy is protected, it is protected. Okay. You're not allowed to, you on the committees are not allowed to talk about any hearings or any decisions or any recommendations you made. If you do, you're going to be called before the grievance committee, pro standards committee, and might be kicked out of the association. Okay, so it's a privacy. If you go to court, that's not private. That's, anybody can look at that and see what you did and what the decision were and all the evidence and everything else. These 3 committees are private. They're not allowed to talk about it. Now, mediation is a little bit different. Mediation is a voluntary process. As a certified mediator, I found out most of the time it is a miscommunication. The mediation process, and it's in all of your contracts, and it's part of what you signed when you joined the association, that you will mediate. So same thing happens. A certified mediator, such as myself, sits down with the 2 parties and says, what's going on here? And then a lot of times it's a miscommunication. And what I say is, what did you want? What did you say? And then we reiterate it to the other party, and they go, oh, well, that's not what I heard. It's just like, remember when you were kids and you'd play post office and you'd whisper in the one kid's ear, something happened, and they'd whisper around the circle, and by the time it got back, Bill Clinton will have done something else. So with that in mind, we get all of the stuff out of the middle, we get the two parties together, and we try to get the communication started. It is not binding. Arbitration is binding. You can take arbitration to a court of law, and the judge will say, was this arbitrated? Yes, it was. What was the arbitration's decision? They decided for the complainant. Court holds same, case dismissed. Our mediation is not binding. So you could mediate, get it all taken care of, just clear up the communications, or you could say, no, I understood that perfectly. I'm going to arbitration. All right. So remember, prohibited conduct found in the DRE regulations is specifically prohibited with the Business and Professions Code as well as the NAR Code of Ethics. And if you commit any of these, it ain't going to be us that disciplines you. It's going to be the Department of Real Estate. The deputies are going to come in and they're going to say, hi, how y'all doing? Come on down here. We're going to work you over a little bit. You're not going to have a license. Okay. Now, that finishes up this. We're now going to go to the C.A.R. website, the California Association of Realtors website, and this is where all of this stuff starts. So we do a new screen share, we come to the website. You always know you're at the California Association of Realtors website based on the fact that it has somebody sitting on a house. Now, I'm not sure what the significance is of the person sitting on, but I know I'm at the California Association of Realtors website. Let me look at some chat here. All right, good. If it possibly be part of the local MLS and opt out of, yes. All right, so somebody asked, and this was a court case that was in 1971 or two. It was called the Marin County Association of Realtors versus Carlson. Okay, that court case in California said you can be a realtor and not a member of the MLS. You can be a member of the MLS and you do not have to be a realtor. Okay, that court case that was decided, it was called the Marin County Association of Realtors versus Carlson. Now, nobody will tell you about that. I'm telling you because that's part of what I think is the educational process. You know, there are people that are in the MLS that are not realtors. If they are in the MLS and they're not a realtor, what we're talking about today does not apply to them. Only if you are a realtor must you follow the Code of Ethics. And you do not have to be a member of the MLS. I am past president of the Realtor Commercial Alliance of Orange County. We don't have an MLS. Real commercial guys, we don't have an MLS. We have information services, LoopNet, CoStar, Crexi, Bravitas, For My Listing. Those are information services. They're not multiple listing services. Multiple listing services were put together by the National Association of Realtors in 1960. Okay, and it's the best way. It is the idea behind the MLS is you will get the highest price in the shortest period of time with the least amount of hassle, and the buyer will get the best price in the least amount of time with the least amount of hassle. So that there's so many benefits to the MLS to have membership there, but in commercial, it's just done a little bit differently. So I'm just letting you know, you can be a member of the MLS and not a member of the association. You can be a member of the association, not a member of the MLS. Now, if you are underneath a broker's license and I'm a member of the MLS, you must be a member of the MLS. Okay, otherwise I got to pay for it, and most of the time we're not going to do that. So that's because I could, as a member of the MLS, I could give you all the information. You're not paying for it. So they want to make sure that it's equal out there through everything. All right. So when we go here, we're going to go to the Code of Ethics. Let me see if we got any. Okay, fine. If you go up here, and this is where I find all of this stuff. I know someplace in here, if I click on the right stuff, I'll find it. But if I click here and I type in the words Code of Ethics, it will show up. Code of Ethics, the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics. If I click on this, let's make sure we go around here. So we go to the California Association of Realtors. We got this website. Somebody's sitting on a house. They used to be sitting. Remember when they used to sit on a round chair? Now they're sitting on a house. I got to put in my fingerprint here. Now I'm afraid somebody's going to steal my computer and cut off my finger so they can get into it. Jeez. All right. If you come up here and you say search and you search for code of ethics, it takes you to the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics. If you click on this, it says, hi, you want to go to the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics? You say, yes, I do. Then you click right here. It takes you to where the Code of Ethics reside, and that is the National Association of Realtors. You want to look at the Code of, then go to where they reside, where they are updated, where they're, and if you look at these Code of Ethics, if they're highlighted in red, yellow, there's been changes. Now, somebody just asked me, when are we going to take a break? We take a break. Well, let's just take a break right now, and we'll come back and we'll finish up, and we'll be done by 1 o'clock. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go over the 17 articles. There's 17 articles in the Code of Ethics. I told you that it goes over the 1 through 9 are duties to the clients and customers, 10 through 14 duties to the public, and 15, 16, and 17 duties to other realtors. So when we come back, we'll take a, I don't know, 5-minute break. Let's make it a 10-minute break. I'll come up here. I'll put in 10 minutes. 10 minutos. Okay. Take a 10-minute timer here and we'll go. So we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Get up, stretch, run around the room. 10-minute break. Lots of stuff to cover here if we're going to get out by 4 o'clock. Oh, that got your attention. No, we're done at 1. Okay. And I told you, stick around. I'm going to show you something. You're going to just, it's unbelievable. When I first saw it, I said, no, that's impossible. I'm going to show you. All right. So let's go back to our Code of Ethics here. Dun, dun, dun. So we're here. Good. Go back to our Code of Ethics. All right. So this is the 2024 Code of Ethics. It's highlighted, which means there's been some changes. I love the preamble. It says, under all is the land. Upon its wise utilization and widely allocated ownership depends the survival and growth of free institutions of our civilization. All right. So, 1, do you have to be a citizen of the United States of America in order to own real property here? No. Do you have to have a green card? No. Do you have to have a social security number in order to own real property in the United States? No. Do you have to be 18 years of age or older in order to own real property in the United States? No. That was the Jackie Coogan decision. He was a child star up in Hollywood. His parents were stealing all his money. The judge took his money and put it in real estate. You can own it. You just can't sell it. Now, I've been in over 40 different countries in the world, and basically, you cannot be an owner of real property unless you are a citizen. Number one. Number two, usually only the elite own real estate. So I think that our preamble is indicative of what we strive for as real estate professionals, that everybody have that access. Article 1, these are to clients and customers. All right. I didn't know there was a difference between clients and customers, but I learned. How many of you have ever dealt with a buyer or seller that you wish had never been born? We all have. When did you know they were going to be a problem? In the very beginning, but we took them on anyway because we needed the money. Then we wish we had, and we could give the money back. Those to me are customers. A customer is a one-time shot. In my business, I want you as a client. A client is somebody I sell a house, second house, third house, fourth house, investment properties. You are my client for life. So the National Association of Realtors says, we understand that. However, you must treat everybody the same. You cannot say, oh, you're a customer, I'm not going to give you the service. You're a client, I'm going to give you service. All right. Second item, it talks about when acting as a principal, you adhere to the code of ethics. So if you're a realtor and you're buying and selling real estate, you still have to adhere to the National Association of Realtors code of ethics. You can't take off your realtor hat and put on your snake in the grass hat to buy and sell real estate. Number 2, it says the duties imposed encompass all real estate activities, whether it's in person, electronic, or by mail. So the Global Signature Act of the year 2000 said you can sign contracts digitally, and they are enforceable in a court of law. And it talks about that. Third, 1-3. Now, here's what happened. We had the 17 articles. As a matter of fact, when I started in the real estate business, 1976, and I see some of you are double O's. I notice you have double O. I think Diane and Yamor are double O's. That means you got your real estate license before 1986. The double O's went out and it went to 01. So we seen some changes. When I started back in 1976, there were 23 articles in the Code of Ethics. We have 17 now. Now we have 23. Or we had 23. Are we getting less ethical? No. We had 23 articles. We did not have standards of practice. A standard of practice explains what the article is. So here's what happens. Remember, we had the 3 standing committees: grievance committee, pro standards committee, arbitration committee. Grievance committee says, yes, this is a violation. The professional standards committee hears it and says, They then make their recommendation to the board of directors. The board of directors either say yes, no, or maybe. If they say yes, that is sent to the National Association of Realtors. And the National Association of Realtors then go, we have received quite a few hearings on this subject. We're going to clarify it by having a standard of practice. Attempting to secure a listing with deliberately misleading the owner to the value. Now, this is the one where you hear these agents, they go, listen, I want to be the last one in. You're going to have 3 other agents tell you what they're going to do to market your property. Let me be number 3. They come in and they say, okay, what do those other agents tell you your home is worth? They say, nah, they don't know what they're doing. It's worth at least $100,000, $200,000 more. Now you have no comps, you have nothing. You're just buying the listing. And then you spend the next 30 days pounding the sellers down, trying to get them down to a price that'll sell. That's a violation of the Code of Ethics. It's also a violation of law. Remember, I told you some of the Code of Ethics have law. We got laws here in the state of California called restraint of trade. You're not allowed to do that. Realtors, when seeking to become a buyer's rep, will not say, oh, there's savings. So I say, okay, listen, the National Association of Realtors in a settlement said we all have to have buyer representation agreements. Hi, buyer, how you doing? Here's your buyer representation agreement. It says you have to pay me a commission. You don't have to pay me a commission. The seller's going to pay me. You can't say that. Okay, that's a violation of law because you have a contract, and it's also a violation of your Code of Ethics. Article 1, Standards of Practice 1-4. It talks about when representing a buyer, seller, landlord in the same transaction, you will disclose the fact that you're representing both parties. Now, again, I told you, most of the United States could not represent both buyer and seller because it was a violation of English common law. There was 39 states when it first started that couldn't do that. On the Western United States, we're under Spanish law. We can represent both buyer and seller. At this moment in time, there are only 8 states that cannot represent both buyer and seller. So 31 of the 39 said, yes, you can. We've gone over to Spanish law and says you can represent both buyer and seller. If you can represent both buyer and seller, you must disclose it. This came in 93. This was adopted in 1993. We've been doing this since 88. We had the agency disclosure form. 6 talks about submit all offers as objectively and quickly as possible. Now, California law says you must submit all offers. It doesn't say anything about quickness or objectiveness. It just says you must submit all offers. Your code of ethics say as quickly as possible. Now, if you have a seller that says, hey, I'm going to be in Europe, I don't want to see any offers until I'm back, I understand. You just get that in writing. When an offer comes in, you show that to the agent. You're not trying to sell it yourself, because that's what they think. You didn't submit my offer. You're trying to sell it yourself. No. Sellers told me they don't want to see offers. It's in writing. I do everything in writing. Seller says, no. I say, I commemorate that with an email, text saying, this is what you said. Is that correct? If they do not say no, that's admissible in a court of law as to their agreement. 7, it says when acting, and we are good actors and actresses, we will continue to submit offers and in writing. Okay, so a buyer comes walking and says, I love this home. I want to buy this home. They make an offer. We go into escrow. We've been in escrow for a month. Another offer comes in. Do I have to show that offer? Yes. Do I have to show the property? Yes, unless the seller has said, no, do not show the property anymore. Now, you know as well as I do. If you got an offer and you're in escrow and it's going to close, and you get another offer and you submit it and the seller goes, oh my goodness, it's for $100,000 more. I want to accept this one. If they accept that one, they've already got an offer. They're in violation of the C.A.R law. You all know what the C.A.R law is, right? In season 4 of Star Trek, Captain James T. Kirk found out he could not be in 2 different places at the same time. You can't have 2 different buyers of the same property. Somebody's going to sue somebody. And we already decided, how many of you want to go to court and lose? Nobody. How many want to go to court and win? How many of you don't want to go to court? All of us. So in that particular instance, yes, we have this obligation, but I'm going to ask the seller, we've got an offer. Yes, you've accepted. Yes, you're in escrow. Yes. You're happy with the offer? Yes. If another offer comes in, do you want to see it? Yes. If you look at it and it's a better offer, you know you can't take it, because if you do, you'll be sued. Oh, I don't want to be sued. Well, if you don't want to be sued, then you give me a letter that says if another offer comes in, don't show it to the seller. Seller says, I'm happy with this offer. We're going to close the deal. You get that in writing. Now, when another offer comes in, the agent cannot say you're trying to sell it yourself. No, the seller doesn't want to see that offer, and here it is in writing. I have to submit all offers. The law does not say if you're in escrow, you don't have to. And your code of ethics say if you are in escrow, you still have to. What you need to do is you need to mitigate the problem with lawsuits and say, do you want to see? Seller says, yeah, I want to see them all. I understand what the legal ramifications are. Perfect. I commemorate that, put it and say, you told me to show you those offers. If in fact you take any of them, you have 2 that you've accepted, you're probably going to wind up in court. Just letting you know. 8 talks about when agents and brokers working with the buyers. Same thing. If you have a written request of an offer that was submitted, you must disclose that. In 7, now, we were just talking about the purchase agreement. On the residential purchase agreement, okay, we found out we're not a party to the contract. It says it on the last page. It says it on the first page. On the first page, this is a residential purchase agreement. It says right here, buyers and sellers are referred to as parties. Brokers are not parties to this agreement. It says it on the first page. It says it on the last page, and we still don't see it. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. If you're dealing in residential properties, you'll have to understand not only the ramifications of the houses in the area, but also the forms. So if in fact you don't know what your forms are, you're already in violation of real estate law. And you're in violation of the code of ethics because it says you will be knowledgeable. Okay, so I'm not a party to this. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the last page in this purchase agreement. The last page in the purchase agreement. This is the agent page. We get our whole, it's 17. We get the whole page. It says we are not a party to the contract, and the only reason we're signing this is to confirm our agency relationship. Disclose, elect, and confirm. We give them the agency disclosure form once we form more in a casual relationship. We elect who we're going to represent by checking off boxes on the first page, and then we sign the last page, page 17. Okay. We're only signing it to confirm our agency relationship, but it says right here, presentation of offer. It says pursuant to the standards of practice 1-7. Where are we? 1-7. If the buyer's agent makes a written request, the seller's agent must confirm in writing that the offer was accepted or was presented. So you've submitted offers, you never hear back. You say, what happened? You know, your buyer's calling you every 15 minutes. Did they accept? Did they accept? Did they accept? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Nobody calls. I've texted, I've emailed, I went down to the office, I went to the bars. I can't find this agent. I don't know if they accept it or not. My office policy is be polite. If another offer is accepted, then you, on the bottom of this form that was given by other agents, you get the seller to initial offer not accepted. Now, you remember when it said offer rejected? Now we're a kinder, gentler purchase agreement. It says offer not accepted. If in writing, the buyer's agent asks for that, you have to show them this page. I'm just telling you what your code of ethics say. And it's also law in the state of California. Okay. So it's on your code of ethics. We go back here to code of ethics, article 1-7. You must, in writing, show that the offer was submitted. If you are a buyer representation agreement, you must show in writing that you have performed under that buyer representation agreement. Now, let me make sure we're clear on a few things for this. Seller, are you going to pay me? No. Oh. Buyer, are you going to pay me? No. Then I'm not going to do the deal. If you're working for free out there, let me know. I got plenty of work for you. Otherwise, we're not doing it. We're not going to get involved if we're not getting paid. And I had one agent say, well, I'll do it. I say, why would you do it? Oh, I need the practice. Do not practice on your clients. Practice on your other agents. Practice on your friends, your family. Don't practice on your clients. That's how you lose them. Okay. We're not working for free. I'm just letting you know. So we've had a listing agreement. We can't have that anymore. On the MLS say they'll pay us if we represent the buyer. We have to have our own buyer representation broker compensation agreement. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You can have all the listings you want. Unless you get an offer that closes, you ain't going to make a dime. You can have all the buyer representation agreements you want. If they don't get an offer accepted, you don't make a dime. The only way you get paid is if you get a RPA accepted, the residential purchase agreement. So if we come back up here, if you submit this and it gets accepted and it closes escrow, that's how you get paid. Here's what our problem is. We, the agents and the broker, are parties of the listing agreement. The seller signs it and the agent signs it. We are parties. We make decisions on that. We are parties of the buyer representation broker compensation agreement. The broker or the agent signs the contract for the buyer, and the buyer signs it. On this agreement, we're not a party to the contract. We know this because it's on here twice, on the first page and on the last page. So, seller, buyer, how are we going to get paid? Here's what they determined for us almost 2 years ago, March of 2022. On the top of page 2, they talked about buyer agrees to pay the broker's compensation to brokers using a form called an SPBB. Now, this was before we had a decision or anything. Oh, wait a minute. You know who wrote up these forms, right? Who put these forms together? Not who filled them in. We filled in these forms. Who put the standard form together? Oh, you think attorneys? Wrong answer. It was put together by realtors such as yourself. It is a committee at C.A.R. called Standard Forms. I volunteered for standard forms in the 1980s when the purchase agreement went from 2 pages to 4 pages. I said, nobody's going to sign this thing. They said, oh, we need your help. It was like hitting my head against the wall. It felt so good when I quit. Because here's what I figured out. Every time we lose a major lawsuit, it's good for another paragraph in this. So standard forms 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, March of 2022, 23, 24, said, hi, you want to get paid? Use this form. We can't put it in the MLS that the seller will pay the buyer's agent. Theoretically, we can't even call and ask. No, I always call and ask because the only person who can record and determine what you've said over the telephone at this moment in time is the NSA, National Security Agency. So with that in mind, I'm not going to put it in writing. Hi, tell me. I'm not going to give a flyer. I'm not going to say, go to this area and we'll show you as to what the commission is going to be. Excuse me. The compensation is going to be. So in some magical crystal ball, 2 years ago, Standard Form said, we'll just put this form in. So here's what happens. Hi, buyer, you want to pay the commission? No. Okay. Then we'll ask the seller to pay it. We'll use a form called the SPBB, Seller Pays Buyer Broker. All right. Now, remember we did the old Wayback Machine? We did a little time travel. Remember, we went back to 1620. We found out about English common law. We went to 1848. We found out about Spanish law. Now we're going to get on that time machine. We're going to go back 10 years, just 10 years in the state of California. We get out of the Wayback Machine. We go to an escrow officer. The escrow officer, hi, escrow officer, have you closed the transaction today? Yes, we have. We have the buyer's closing statement, the seller's closing statement. On which closing statement was the commission paid? Buyer's closing statement or seller's closing statement? It was paid on the seller's closing statement. It was always paid on the closing. Are you ready? Are you sitting down? Do you have your seatbelt on? Where did the seller get the money to pay us? From the buyer. Nothing's changed. The buyer gets a loan. The buyer puts a down payment to give the seller. Seller pays us. The buyer has to pay that money back on a 30-year loan. They've always gotten the money from the buyer. We just didn't know it. Now, with a buyer representation broker compensation agreement, we say, hi, you've always paid the commission. Yeah, I know. But I'm not going to pay it out of my pocket. Fine. Then we'll ask the seller to pay it out of the money you give them through an SPBB. And as part of the code of ethics, we want to make sure that we are knowledgeable in the area in which we're dealing. So we go down here. We're at paragraph. We're actually the 1, and it's 1.8, and it says if you have a buyer representation agreement, you will affirmatively present all offers. The seller, and you will represent the buyer and make sure that any offers they want are presented. 9 talks about an obligation to preserve confidentiality. That's true. However, in California, we have this dilemma, and it's called Easton versus Strasburger, 1984. That was a court case that happened in North Central California, and the basis of the court case said, you must disclose anything that would materially affect whether the buyer would buy or the seller would sell. Oh, wait a minute. I must disclose anything? That's right. So now, to preserve confidential information, we cannot give out confidential information. So the seller says, I don't want you to give them that information. Well, if it's a material fact, we have to, by law. That was a court case in 1984. It was codified, put into our code under the Civil Code 1102. It's on paragraph 11 of our purchase agreement. It says you must disclose anything. So when I look at this code of ethics, I want to make sure it does not reveal confidential information about the clients. It is that confidential information is a disadvantage. I can't give it. And that's the confidential information. This is what the code of ethics is saying. We understand there are some states out there that have Easton versus Strasburger. If this is confidential information and it's not to be given by law, then you don't have to get, you can't give it. So it tells you, I don't want you to disclose this. If you say, well, I have to by law, that's different. If you say, oh, okay, I won't disclose it. But you must just, you in California must disclose anything that materially affects whether the buyer or seller would sell. All right. We come down here to 10. 10 talks about shall consistent with the terms and conditions of the real estate property management. Now, wait a minute. As a real estate licensee under 10131 of the Business and Professions Code, I can sell single family homes. I can sell apartments. I can sell commercial, industrial, raw land. Can I do property management? Absolutely. You need a license to do property management. You need a trust account to do property management, okay? It's the number one reason agents lose their license under the state of California. It's under Business and Professions Code 10145. But it says, if in fact, then you have a right to the health. You must watch over the health and safety of the tenants. So you can't say, oh, we're going to dig a big hole here. We're going to put in some new plumbing. We'll just leave it open. You got to put it off so the tenants don't walk through it in the middle of the night, fall down and get hurt. That's what this says. We don't have anything like that in the state of California. No law like that in the state of California that we have to protect the health of the tenants. But you do in your code of ethics. And it also says you must maintain the client's property against losses. So if you're doing property management, not only do you have to make sure the tenants don't get hurt, but you got to make sure that you have proper insurance. How did we become insurance agents? And based on the fact that California's decided insurance companies cannot make any money, we're losing insurance companies like crazy. 12, when entering into a listing contract, you will tell what the company's policies are, if in fact you represent buyer representation, what that is, and then if there's any potential, you will disclose dual agency. Okay? That's your office policy. And it says same thing with the buyer representation broker compensation agreements. You will say what the company policy is, what the amount of compensation to be paid will be, and any additional offsetting. So in this instance, it says, hi, buyer. You're signing a buyer representation broker compensation agreement, but we're always been paid by the seller out of the money you give them. So we're just letting you know, you need to tell them that. You're obligated to pay it, buyer, but we're going to ask the seller to do it. Number 14, it talks about preparing appraisals. Do we do appraisals? No, not unless you're licensed under the USPAP, Uniform Standards of a Professional Appraisal Practice. And they have their own code of ethics. So unless you're a certified or licensed appraiser, you cannot make. What we do is we do competitive market evaluations. That's what we do. 15, in response to inquiries, the buyer cooperating broker, existence of offers on a piece of property. Whoa, 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 what does this say? Let me show you a form that's been around for 2 years in the state of California that addresses Article 1, Stanza Practice 1-15. If we go to our purchase agreement, remember the old purchase agreement here? This is a residential purchase agreement. There is what there's called the bundle of forms. And ethically, You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. That was the first thing I talked about. And you need to be able to explain these forms. You cannot practice law unless you pass the bar. In order to pass the bar and become an attorney in the state of California, you must pass the bar. You don't have to have any law classes. You don't have to have a JD degree. You have to pass the bar in the state of California, then you can be an attorney. So we're not attorneys. If you are, fine. God bless you. If you're not an attorney, you can't talk about law, but you can explain the contracts. And if they have questions, then they're to talk to their attorneys. It says this 3 times in this purchase agreement. Okay. So now, these bundle of forms, the first form that we talk about is the agency disclosure. This is required by law on the sale of all real property in the state of California. The last form, there's a 17-page purchase agreement that's 27 pages long. I'm just showing you. 17 pages, but up here it says 27 pages. The last page is the Consumer Privacy Act. This is a disclosure and a notice. It says that the buyer and seller have the right to opt out. The next form in our bundle of forms, and these bundle of forms were given to us by our attorneys at C.A.R. Standard Forms put these together, gave them to the attorneys at C.A.R. and said, make sure they're admissible in a court of law. So the attorneys have snipped these over and said, they're okay. We're not telling you have to use them unless it's a disclosure. This is a disclosure. You got to disclose the fact that their information, they have a privacy right here in the state of California. The next one is the fraud. This is just an advisory. It's not required by law, but the biggest problems, well, not the biggest, several problems that we have is the money gets stolen. It's wire fraud. So that's why this form says, make sure your buyers and sellers have a code with their escrow officers, and that you, when you're dealing with sensitive information, are using a secure Wi-Fi. That's a wide area fidelity. To secure your Wi-Fi, you use a VPN, a virtual private network. This is my VPN. I'm not telling you what to use. I'm just telling you this is what I use. I've been teaching the technology class for the National Association of Realtors since the 1980s. We've always done it by Zoom, or not by Zoom. We do what we call GoToMeeting. So I've been doing webinars since the 1980s when all this started. But we want to make sure that nobody could get into our computer. This is called a VPN. What happens is somebody tries to get into my computer. I did not invite. It takes them to Charlottesville, North Carolina, and the boys in Charlottesville say, what y'all doing in Joel's computer? Come here. They don't let them in. So what you want to make sure is that when we're talking about these forms, that you have a secure VPN. You say, I've never heard of that before. I know, that's why I do these classes, to make sure that you're knowledgeable in the area in which you're dealing. You just put in VPN. You might have a built-in VPN. A lot of them now, my phone has a built-in VPN, virtual private network. This computer has, but you want to make sure. That's what this says. This is the Electronics Frauds Advisory. So nobody can hack into your computer, steal your information, send that information to the buyer. The buyer then wires the money to them, and you're the only person left in town. The next form talks about the buyer's homeowner's insurance. Now, again, insurance is a big deal. In the old days, I would say, are you pre-approved to get a loan? Now, I want to know, can you get insurance? Because if you can't get insurance, where are you getting a loan? They're making it impossible for insurance companies. The next one is the fair housing. These are the bundle of forms. These are all the forms that your standard forms and your attorneys at C.A.R. said is a good idea to have in this purchase agreement. This one says this is an advisory, it's not required by law, but if there's any violation of these, and these are the protected classes, and in your listing, this is what it says: examples of conduct that may not be motivated by a discriminatory event, but could have a discriminatory effect. You need to, in the RLA class, I go over that because it specifically talks about not going to federal prison. I don't know about you, but I don't want to hear about that. The next form that we have is the possible representation of more than one buyer and seller. This is a consent and a disclosure. Now, this is what they're talking about in our code of ethics. It's saying, well, let's make sure we're clear on this. This came from standard forms, realtors such as yourself. It was an update of the first form we looked at, the agency disclosure, in that it talked about multiple buyers, didn't have a good definition. As a matter of fact, they had no definition, multiple buyers back in 1988, multiple sellers, and the dual agency disclosure is a little bit clearer for buyers and sellers. Now, here's my question. Realtor A has a listing. Realtor B calls up and says, hey, I got an offer on your listing. Realtor A says, send it on over. Realtor B sends it over to him. My buyer calls me up, says, hey, I want to make an offer on Realtor A's property. I call up Realtor A, hey, property still available? Yeah. Got any offers? Yeah. What are they? Can Realtor A tell me what Realtor B's offers are? Offers are not necessarily confidential. Buyers advise that the seller or the listing agent may disclose the existence of the terms or conditions of the buyer's offer. It's right here. It is signed by the seller. It is signed by the buyer. It is signed by the buyer's agent. It is signed by the seller's agent. There is no excuse for you not to know this, other than I have been taught all my life as a real estate professional, you can't do that. And yet here it is. This form was updated as of the 22nd. So that's 3 years ago. Well, actually 2 years ago. It is now in your code of ethics. It says that if in fact you are asked, are there any offers? You can tell them. Now I know, well, what if the seller says, don't tell them? What seller in their right mind would say, I don't want more money? They always say, yeah, let's bid this puppy up. It is the buyer that may say, no, I don't want this. And when I do the RPA class, I talk about that because it's too important for you to understand your forms. You need to be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal so that you can explain, this possibly could happen, buyer. This possibly could happen, seller. Is it all right? That's right here. You can do this. 16 says, will not access, permit to be accessed anything on the MLS if they're not supposed to be. The MLS is a copyrighted item. You are not supposed to be giving out the information on there unless you have permission through the MLS. And when you signed up with the association, you agreed to the bylaws, and then on your MLS, it says you can send drip, you can do certain things, you can send those out. All right, now we get to Article 2. Article 2 says you'll avoid exaggeration, misrepresentation, concealment. Well, yeah, that's a violation of real estate law here in the state of California. 3 says you shall cooperate with other brokers. Yes, we found out that cooperating MLS will get the highest price in the shortest period of time with the least amount of hassle, or will get the buyer the best price in the shortest period of time with the least amount of hassle. 3-3 talks about does not preclude the listing broker and cooperating broker from entering into a different agreement on compensation. So now we have a listing. The seller, the RLA says the seller will pay me, the listing agent. We have a buyer representation broker compensation agreement. The buyer says, I will pay my agent their compensation. If we're going to be paid by the seller, both agents, we just have to disclose that. Do we do that? Yes, it's in the listing agreement. Now, I'm telling you, some states don't have this. So that's why some of this is okay. And some of this is like, we've been doing this for years. 5 talks about sub-agency. We have no sub-agency. Do you remember that court case that was called the Marin County Association of Realtors versus Paulson? In there, it also, well, here's what happened. The guy got mad and he sued everybody in the MLS. The seller got mad at his agent and found out all the agents of the MLS were sub-agents. Well, if you're my agent, I'm going to sue you. So he sued all the agents. The California Association of Realtors said, no, we're getting rid of this. We have no more sub-agency here in California. You represent the buyer exclusively, the seller exclusively, or both buyer and seller. There's no sub-agency. 10 talks about cooperate and establish. Article 3 relates to the obligation to share information on listed property and make it available to the brokers. It says you may not refuse to cooperate on the basis of the broker's race, color, sex, national origin, religion, familial status, handicap status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. There are 9 protected classes at the federal level. At the state level, do you remember we went over this? At the state level, when we look at our purchase agreement, we come back here to fair housing. These are all the protected classes here. Federal level, we have race, color, sex, national origin, religion, familial status. That's the makeup of the family. You cannot discriminate on the makeup of the family. Handicap, they call it disability at the state level, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Those are the 9 protected classes at the federal level. What you're looking at, we're talking about the code of ethics from the National Association of Realtors. There are 9. We're in California. You have 22. There are 22 protected classes here. So just because there's 9, you went through the class, I don't know. You need to be cognizant of all 22 and make sure you do not discriminate. The only one I have a little consternation with is any arbitrary characteristic. I don't know what that is. All right. Article 3. Now we get down to Article 4. Will not acquire an interest or buy or for their families or anybody else without disclosing that interest. Okay, wait. I represent mom. I'm going to sell her piece of property. I have got to disclose the fact mom is related to me? Yes. It's in law. That's what I told you. Most of this code of ethics is already law here in the state of California. 5 says, shall not undertake to provide professional services concerning the value of a piece of property where you have a contemplated interest. Okay, so here's where it is. Somebody says, hey, I want to sell this property. I'm thinking, ooh, I'd like to buy that property. So I give them a competitive market analysis. It's way down here. Or I am a partner with these people and I say, oh, the property is worth this amount or this, whatever it is, taking advantage of my position. Will not, if I'm providing professional services as a real estate professional, I will disclose the fact I have an ownership interest or I'm thinking about buying your property. Then the buyer can say, or the seller can say, I don't want you to be a party to this because you're skewed. You want the best price, so you'll give me a lower value. Number 6, shall not accept any commissions without everybody knowing about it. Okay, that's state of California. Any commissions you get belong to the broker. That's the law in the state of California. 7, in a transaction shall not accept any compensation from any parties without the knowledge and consent of all. So, seller, you going to pay me? Yes. Buyer, you going to pay me? Yes. I have a listing agreement and I have a buyer representation agreement. I'm a dual agent. I have to disclose that to both, and both of them have to say okay to that. That's been state law since 1988. Apparently it wasn't in some of the states. We have 50 of them, Realtors shall keep a separate account of funds in an appropriate financial institution. That's trust fund handling. That's the number one reason agents lose their license in the state of California. And it's not that you steal the money, it's that you don't handle it properly. That's why I love the RPA. The residential purchase agreement says the buyer wires the money to escrow. I never touch it. If I don't touch it, I don't have to write it in a trust fund register. I can't mess up. Now, with trust fund accounts, if you have a trust fund account, you're doing property management or some other reason, you have a trust fund account, you're getting money from your clients, you got to be very careful of that. Number 9, it says for the protection of all parties to assure whenever possible that all contracts will be in an understandable language. What language is that? What languages these are contracts in? Oh, you say English? No, I'm going to tell you this is not English. In England, they speak English. In England, they write English. We're not writing English here. So what language? Oh, you say American. Oh, okay, fine. North American, Central American, or South American? They're all Americans. So here's what I have determined that we speak based on a film clip that I saw in 1963. It showed Khrushchev. He was the head honcho of the USSR, now called Russia. He was at a speech at the UN. He took his shoe off and he beat the podium with it. And he said, "I will bury you, Amerikanskis." I believe we speak Amerikansky. The language that we speak in the United States of America is different than any other language on earth. It's a conglomeration of all sorts of language. Based on that, we were trying about 20 years ago to put all our contracts in the state of California in different languages. We found out it's economically not feasible. So now it must be in an understandable language, 1. 2, in California, we have a form, and it's called a translator or interpreter form. You can be a translator or an interpreter of these contracts, and it is in a language that's understandable to them. And you can, in this, well, let's make sure we're clear on this one. In our agreements, this is our purchase agreement. We've seen there's about 8 forms that are attached here. That means how many forms are there? Now, I'm a certified forms trainer. We train on about 50 forms. I came down here and I looked at the number of forms. These are all of the forms right over here that you could have in a real estate transaction in the state of California. Now, I'm a numbers guy. I saw this and I went, how many forms? And I counted them. 259 possible forms that you could use in a real estate transaction in the state of California. And they tell you, don't practice law. What? It's getting interesting out there. So based on that, let me see if we have a question here. I keep getting disconnected. Okay. Based on the fact that we have our code of ethics, and the code of ethics say that we'll have them in understandable languages. In those 259 forms, there's one that's called interpreter translator. And those of you who speak a different language, you are blessed. My language was Swedish. I never learned Swedish. My grandparents would not teach me Swedish. I have a whole group of people I cannot help, because if you speak the language, you are knowledgeable in the area in which you deal, you're more trusted. Okay, duties to the public. Now, we get down to there's 4 elements in here, actually 5. Article 10 says you will not discriminate. We've already talked about this. Race, color, sex, national origin, religion, familial status, handicap status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. It goes on to say that you shall not print or display anything that's discriminating. And we have a form for that. Remember, it's the Fair Housing Form. And it goes on to say that you will not use hate speech or harassment speech. If you do that, you're in violation of the Code of Ethics. Say, I'm going to take off my realtor hat and I'm going to put in my curse everybody hat. You're a realtor. You do that, you're going to get a little subpoena. You know, when you're called before the Professional Standards Committee, they send you a subpoena. I don't know about you, but I don't want to hear about that. Article 11 talks about provide your clients and customers standard conform with competence. You will be knowledgeable in the area in which you deal. That's the subtext of all of my classes. Not only do you have to learn the rules and regs of where you're selling, and I'm going to tell you, they do business in Northern California than they do in Southern California, okay? And the Mason-Dixon line runs right through Fresno. So if you're not knowledgeable in that area, you need to get that knowledge. 1. 2, you need to be knowledgeable on the forms so that you can fill them out properly. 1, 2, you can explain them to your clients properly, but not practice law. 12 goes on and says you will be honest and truthful in all your advertising. All right, I'll be honest and truthful. It says in your brokerage services, You will not say something is free if it is not. In the old days, I've been using buyer representation agreements since 1996. I made it an office policy procedure because I had somebody come into my office and say, Joel, I need you to show me real estate. I said, what do you mean? Well, I'm going to have my sister's uncle's cousin-in-law write it up, but I just need you to show it to me. I said, then why don't you have your sister's uncle's cousin-in-law show you the property? Because I don't get paid a dime unless you buy through me. Now, his response back, and I always remember that, was, you're not on salary? People don't know. They now know. We used to be on commissions. Now we're on compensation. I don't know how that works. I've been a commissioned salesperson for 40 years plus. Now I'm a compensated salesperson. Okay, fine. So in this particular case, we would say, oh, buyer representation, broker compensation agreement, the seller pays a commission. You don't need to worry about it. You can't say that because they might have to worry about it. Now, just to be clear, we're talking about federal stuff. If you have a VA buyer, they're getting 100% loan. They say, I don't have the money. Well, wait a minute. We've been doing VA loans now for, I don't know, since 1947, when the Veterans Administration was formed. The money goes from the buyer to the seller, and the seller pay. They have always financed the commissions. They just came out and confirmed that publicly. Veterans Administration said you can finance commissions, and the VA said it too. 3.5% down. That's not going to pay the commission. They get a loan. That money goes to the seller, and the seller pays us. It's always been this way. We just didn't know it. Now we get down to offering premiums. Nothing wrong with that. You just can't say, hi, enter my contest, give me your name and phone number and email address, and we'll send you to a free trip to Bakersfield or wherever. You can't say that and then take it and give it to the person who gave you the listing. It has to be a legitimate drawing. 9, if you use websites, we'll disclose the firm's name and what the license numbers are. Now, this is state of California law. If you have any transaction with anybody who has never met you before, you must give them your DRE license number. So on your business cards, on your letterhead, on your website, on your texts, on your emails, you must have your DRE license number. That's the law here in the state of California. Well, they made it part of their policy and procedures manual. And it also talks about obligation to present a true picture in your advertising. So if you're using the internet or flyers or anything like that, you must present you can't say, beautiful 5-bedroom, 3-bath home. We made a mistake for 100,000. We made a mistake. It wasn't 5-bedroom, 3-bath. It was a 1-bedroom, 1-bath. No. You're culpable for that mistake because you should have your broker, you or the agent should have verified that information before it went out to a public access situation. Then obligated to present a true picture in your advertising, use and display only professional designations. I dealt with a guy. He had all these designations after his name. I went, whoa, this guy's really sharp. I looked at some of I said, what is this designation? He said, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, well, I just put a bunch of letters after my name because I thought it made me look good. That's a violation of real estate law. Okay, it's called false advertising. And in your code of ethics, it's also under Article 12. 13, it says shall not engage in any activity which constitutes an unauthorized practice of what? Law. Now, suffice to say that in the real estate business, we have a lot of legal forms. In California, we have legal staff at C.A.R. That legal staff looks over the forms that we, as standard forms, realtors put together. So all of the forms that we have, other than 2, there are 2 forms we got from Sacramento. The first form is the agency disclosure. We looked at that. That was 1988. The first one we got from them was the TDS, Transfer Disclosure Form. This is required on all 1 to 4 residential units. And you must fill it out. That's what the law says, page 3. So, and you must include it on the sale of all 1 to 4 residential units. There's no exceptions to this. People say, well, what if I fill out the AVID? The AVID is not required by law. The TDS is required by law under 1102 of the Civil Code. The AVID is in the contract, so you can use it. And the AVID was put together by Standard Forms. It's a better form than the TDS that was given to us in 1986. No changes to that. It's an old form, but you still have to do 2 things with the TDS. If you're going to use the AVID, you check off the box that says see attached AVID, and then you sign the TDS. You've complied with 1102 of the Civil Code. The TDS is a better form. It was put together by realtors to protect buyers, sellers, and realtors. But I'm just telling you what the law is. Okay. Remember, that was my second caveat. I'm going to talk to you about my first caveat was 1 to 4 residential units and the laws that are ancillary to those. My second caveat is I'll tell you what those laws are, and so you can verify them. And my last caveat is it doesn't matter what I say, it matters what your broker says, because your broker's the one going to jail with you. I mean, going to court with you, not me. Okay. All right. 14. Now we finally get down. It says, if charged with unethical practice, you're going to go before the grievance committee, then the pro standards committee. So we talked about those. Grievance committee looks at the E1 and says, yes, it's a violation of the Code of Ethics, the Border Association bylaws, and the MLS bylaws. It then goes on to the next committee, which is the Professional Standards Committee. Professional Standards Committee says you will bring your evidence and everything you have, Realtor A, Realtor B, complainant, respondent, and you will then, almost like a court thing, you get to present evidence, they get to cross-examine, you get to have witnesses cross-examine, those kind of things. Once that's all done, we on the Professional Standards Committee write down our finding of facts, and then we give our recommendation to the board of directors. Okay, that's the process. That's what it talks about. It talks about in Article 14, you will follow that process. And you will not make this, you're not going to say, whoa, you're not going to believe the committee I sat on today. This guy was a real ding-a-ling. You can't tell them that kind of information. 3 talks about will not obstruct the board's investigation. So if we have an investigation going on, if you are called as a witness, you have to show up because you're sent a subpoena. I'm just telling you. And if you don't show up, then you're in violation, and you get to be before the Professional Standards Committee for violating the board or association's bylaws. And will not intentionally, 14-14, impede investigation. Now we get down to the ones with realtors. This is where the rubber meets the road. Shall not knowingly or recklessly make false or misleading statements about other realtors. Okay, here's what this says. You're not going to say bad things about other realtors. Okay, I'm not going to say. It used to say you will not disparage other realtors, but now it says you won't say bad things. If you do, and it's wrong, you're going to be called on to make a public apology. So I think this guy's a no good snake in the grass. So I say to somebody else, hey, this guy's no good. That person goes back to that person, that agent, that realtor, and says, hi, Joel says you're a crummy person. What? They file an E1, they go into we give our testimony, and it comes up, they were not a bad person. I was just mad. And I didn't even know the Code of Ethics. I can be sanctioned under the Code of Ethics because Article 15 says you won't say bad things. Number 2, if I've given that information out to anybody, in other words, I said to my agents underneath my license, don't work with this agent, they're a bad. If my statement was wrong and I give it to them and they go and tell other people and it was wrong, they have to do a public apology. All right, now we get to 16. shall not engage in any practice that is against an exclusive right to sell. You listed this home over here, or an exclusive buyer representation agreement. So if I have a listing on this house, you're not going to knock on the door. Hi, listen, you're listed with Joel. I know, but he's no good. Cancel your listing and list with me. That's a violation of your code of ethics. It's also a violation of law. It says right here that if you do this, you're going to be in violation of law. Okay, thank you. So what I'm telling you here is 16 says you cannot interfere with an exclusive right to sell listing. And if you do, not only is it a violation of code of ethics, it's a violation of law here in the state of California. It's called restraint of trade. It's under our civil code. If you have a buyer representation agreement, you can't interfere with that. If you do, you're in violation of law and code of ethics. You have a listing on them, basically. Now, I thought that was pretty clear. You can't interfere with the listing on a house. You can't interfere with a buyer representation agreement. Apparently, that was so unclear, it needed 20 more paragraphs to explain what that meant. So all the way down to 16-20. All right, well, let's review some of these. Number one, 16-1. It doesn't intend you to be aggressive or innovative. There's nothing wrong with that. It says that you making general announcements. Nothing wrong with that. You just have to say, hi, this is a general announcement. If you're already listed with another agent or you already have a buyer representation with another agent, please disregard this. I am not soliciting. 16-3 talks about doesn't preclude you from contacting to offer another business that the other person is not offering. I'll give you an example on this one. My office policy, the MJC Realty, is we do not do property management. I ain't doing property management. Too much problems with 10145 of the Business and Professions Code. So I have a listing on this house over here. Nothing stops you from going to that house. Hi, listen, I know you're listed with Joel. However, we provide property management. Our company does. And if the listing does not sell and you need to rent it out, contact us. Nothing wrong with that. Talks about 16-5 will not solicit any agreements of the buyer or seller. In other words, 4 says, I will not solicit you're already listed. I'm not going to, and if I have a buyer representation, but it goes on to say, are you ready for this? It goes on to say that if it's between a listing broker, that information may be discussed in the terms alternate. So now I had a situation. I was showing a piece of property several years ago. The seller was there. Now the seller's not supposed to be there when you're showing property, but he was there. And when I started to leave, he said, hey, Joel, come here. I like the way you do business. I want to list my home with you. Now, in the old days, you had to go, I didn't hear nothing. Now, with this, you can say, okay, I understand. I would be happy to sit down with you and give you a listing presentation once your listing has expired. You can respond back. Nothing wrong with that. If a buyer representation, you can respond back. Nothing wrong with that. 6 says the client and relationship contracted regarding the exclusive agency, either indirectly initiate discussions of future. So now I've got a listing on this house over here. It expires. Nothing stops you from going to the door. Hi, I know you were listed with Joel. That's expired. I would like to talk to you about listing with me. Once it's expired, it's open game. 8 has been entered into with another realtor, does not preclude you or inhibit you from entering into a similar one at the expiration. Okay, that's what I just was talking about. And it talks about 16-9, any representation agreement. So if you have a buyer representation agreement and it expires, nothing stops me from saying to the buyer, hi, your listing is expired with that other agent. It's not really a listing. It's called a buyer representation broker compensation agreement. I would like you to sign my BRBC. And it talks about tenants when acting, and we're good actors and actresses, shall disclose their relationship. on the first contact. So now this is one that always, you're sitting on the up desk, you get a telephone call. Hey, listen, I saw this sign on 123 Anywhere Street. Tell me about the house. My thought is this person is a buyer. So I start treating them like a buyer, when in fact, it is not a buyer. It's another realtor that failed to follow the code of ethics and identify themselves. And under law, you're supposed to identify yourself. Law says you must say you're a broker or an agent. Your code of ethics say, hi, this is Joel Carlson. I'm with ABC Realty and I'm a realtor. I'm asking you questions about this property. You're supposed to identify yourselves. Just telling you about the code. And if you don't follow this, you can be called before the grievance committee and then the pro standards committee. And then it goes to the board of directors. And they can put letters on your file. They can kick you out of the association. They can kick you out of the MLS. You could even be fined as much as $15,000. I don't know about you, but I don't want to hear that. When you're acting as a buyer seller, you have a written confirmation of such. You must have this in writing. Now, in the state of California, we have 5 elements of a valid contract. And those elements are capable parties. That means they have to have mental capacity as well as age capacity. So the mental capacity, I'm always suspect of with my buyers. Lawful object, they own it. Do you know that we just got finished with 2 court cases where the tenants called up the realtor and said, hi, we'd like to list our home. The realtor went out and said, are you Mr. and Mrs. Jones? And they said, yes, we are. They weren't Mr. and Mrs. Jones. They were Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They were tenants. They signed the listing agreement. An offer came in. They signed the offer. Escrow instructions came in. They signed the escrow instructions. Do you know how they got caught? The notary. The notary said, let me see your ID. Oh, these don't match. So you got to verify who they are. However you do that, your office policy, whatever it is, my office policy is we say, hi, how you doing? In order for you not to be part of these 2 cases, I want to make sure that you're really who you say you are to protect you. You protect your property. I get a copy of their ID and I take a picture of it, put it in a file. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you in the short period of time I've been doing this business, over 40 years, I figured out you need to protect yourself. And we have a whole month of protection. September is the Realtors Protection Month. And it not only talks about physical protection, but also in your business. 13, if it's exclusively listed, then you will not interfere with that. 14, if you enter into a contract not subject to an exclusive, shall not knowingly obligate them to pay more than 1 commission. So here's what happens. I'm sitting on an open house. A buyer comes walking in. I got a donut in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other. I'm ready for business. They say, wow, I love this home. I think I'd like to make an offer on this home. Okay, let me put these down. Hi, I got 2 questions I have to ask. Number 1, here's your agency disclosure. Remember, that was the first thing we did in class. I said, you have to give them an agency disclosure, telling them what your duties and responsibilities are. Just telling you. You don't do that, you're in violation of real estate law. Number 2, you have to ask them, are you working with other brokers? Oh, yeah, I'm working with everybody in town. Oh, great. Have you ever signed a buyer representation broker compensation agreement? Now, I would show it to them. I found out that they don't know what they've signed. So if we come back here and we look at this, this is the purchase agreement. This is the buyer representation broker compensation agreement. It says buyer representation broker compensation. Buyer rep broker comp. And they moved it down here. So under the buyer representation broker compensation agreement, I showed them to them. Have you ever signed one of these? Oh, yeah, I've signed one of those. Then I can't talk to you anymore. That's what the code of ethics say. You need to ask these questions. If you knock on the door and the guy says, hi, I'm already listed. Okay. If you work with a buyer comes walking in and they've already signed one of these, you have to ask these questions. If it's listed, it's in the MLS, it's got a sign out lockbox, typically. But if a buyer comes walking into your open house, you don't know. That's why my office policy is when a buyer goes out, you know how buyers are. When they want to buy now. They're not waiting. They'll look at everything. They'll go to every open house. I always say, I know that's what you're going to do. If I was in your position, I would do the same thing. Here's what I found that other agents think you're not working with anybody else and they want to get both ends of the commission. To slow that down, I want you to have your vampire cards. These are your vampire cards. Okay, it's a business card. Hi, I'm working with Joel. I give them these cards and I say, when you walk into an open house, you show them the card. Then you sign their little sign-in booklet. You're working with me. Okay, that's fine. Now, if they're not working with me, then this says I can go ahead and I can write up an offer for them. But I have to disclose the fact, what? I'm writing up an offer for the buyer, but I also am the listing agent for the seller. Am I a dual agent? Yes, I have to disclose that. Well, we've been doing that in California since 1988. There's nothing new and exciting here for us, but for other people, other agents out there, there's some new and exciting stuff. 16 talks about sub-agency. We don't have sub-agency anymore. We don't have sub-agency in California. Remember, gotten rid of in 1970, I think it was 1972. Marin County Association of Realtors versus Paulson. 16-18 talks about information obtained from the listing broker through the multiple listing of a cooperating broker cannot create an agency relationship. So information obtained from the listing brokers through offers of cooperation or through referring to the listing broker's client will not create an agency relationship with your buyer. Okay, now again, it's very clear here in California. I represent the buyer exclusively, seller exclusively, or both buyer and sellers. But some states are not clear. So that's why they have these different things in here that say, for clarity's sake, remember, there used to be 39 states. You could not represent both buyer and seller. Now there's only 8. 19 talks about the notice of property for sale or for rent shall not be put on there without the seller's permission. Now, this is an interesting one. Here we've got an agent in LA that's knocking doors. This property is vacant. He can tell us, he asks the neighbors, what's going on here? Oh, the little lady died. Oh, so he tries to get hold of the heirs to get the listing, can't get a hold. So he puts a for sale sign on it. You know, he thinks, I'm just waiting here. He gets all sorts of calls on it. He says, oh, yeah, that one is, you know, tied up or not available or whatever. He had no right to put that sign on there. Well, he called before the grievance committee, pro standards committee, and they said, no, we're suspending you from your ability to do business based on with our Board of Realtors, Association of Realtors. Now, actually, that was a violation of law. So they should go, they should have just said, we can't talk to you. You need to go. We're going to send this. And I've done that a couple of times. They write down on the grievance, on the, what's called E1, what happened. And I go, whoa, that's a violation of law. I then recuse myself from the grievance committee. And I call up the buyer or call up the complaint and say, hey, tell me what happened here. They did this and this and this. Do you have proof of that? Yes, we do. Okay, here's what you need to do. You need to call the Department of Real Estate. We're not listening to this because we don't have any, we don't do the law. We do violation of the Code of Ethics, the Board Association bylaws, the MLS bylaws. And then 20 says, prior to or after a relationship of the current or canceled listing, it does not preclude you from going in and asking to do a similar listing or buyer representation agreement. I've got a client I've been working with for 30 years. Somebody goes to them and says, hey, I want to list your property. If I don't have a listing on it, nothing stops that buyer from saying, fine, I'll deal with you, other than I have built up this reputation with the buyer. I've said to the buyer, we've got 30 years together. You have purchased me as your agent. Remember, they will not purchase from you until they purchase you. So I can't say to them, you have to work with me. You can't have a tying agreement, not in the state of California. In other words, you listed one property with me, you have to list it with me all the time. You're tied into me. Now, just to let you know, there were some situations that came up in Florida that affected our listings and our buyer representation agreement. There were agents in Florida that were knocking doors. Hi, you want to list your home? No, I don't want to list my home. I'm going to die here. That's fine. Your heirs are probably going to have to deal with your estate. So we want you to sign this listing agreement. We'll give you some money if you sign it. Oh, okay. So they signed it. They passed away. The heirs came in, did not know about this listing agreement, listed it with another broker. Then this listing agent came up, said, hey, you owe us money. Here's what the kicker was. These listings were for 40 years. There are 40-year listings. So we now have some restrictions on how long you can list. You can take a listing on a residential property, 1 to 4, for 24 months, unless it's owned by a LLC, a corporation, or a partnership. Okay, then you can own those. You can have it longer, but it's 24 months. With buyer representation agreements, it is 3 months, 90 days. So that's the max amount of time on your, let's see, as a business media profiles, personal information considered separate. Okay, all right. So now we got a question here and it asks about social media. If you're on social media, you follow the code of ethics. You can't put anything in social media that is not part and parcel of your business. If you put inside, I'm the best real estate agent on Mars. Okay, you got a license to sell on Mars? Okay, if you don't, you're in violation of real estate law here in the state of California. You cannot say if the seller solicits me. So I'm sitting here. That's what happened to me. I showed the property. The seller said, I want you to list the property. I said, I can't talk to you until it's expired. Sellers can solicit you all the time. And if you're doing a good job, they will. You just have to tell them, I can't talk to you until your listing expires. If they say, I'm going to cancel the listing. Oh, I don't want to hear that. Okay? Because now the implication is that I told them cancel the listing, list with me. So don't tell them, just wait till it expires. All right, good. So in this particular instance, when we're talking about, the properties and they're for sale, if I'm dealing with this guy forever, or if I have a buyer representation agreement with them, as soon as it expires, they're open territory. And by the way, it says up here in Article 16, you can contact the listing agent and ask them, hi, when's your listing expire? They say, when's your listing expire? They got to tell you. If you call up a listing agent and say, when's your listing expire? The code of ethics say they must disclose that. You say, oh, I can find it out in the MLS. Well, you might be able to, you might not be able to. It depends on the MLS. Right? They may not publish those expiration dates. I'm telling you that in your code of ethics, Article 16, it says they can call up the listing agent, ask the listing agent, when does your listing expire over here? And the listing agent must tell them. And if they don't, they're in violation of the code of ethics and be called before the grievance committee, pro standards committee. It's the little things that will put you out of this business, not the big things. Article 17 says you will cooperate with the arbitration committee. So we talked about arbitration, right? It's a separate committee. If you're related by blood or marriage, you can't serve. And if you're in the same office, you can't serve on a tribunal. Typically, it's a tribunal. It could be more, 5 people. I don't know what you call that, but it's usually 3. And you listen, you make a recommendation. That recommendation goes to your board of directors. And the board of directors are where the proverbial buck stops and they can do anything. So it goes grievance committee, pro standards committee, board of directors. Grievance committee, arbitration committee, board of directors. All right. Now, I told you that if you were here at 1 o'clock, I know we're a little early, that I was going to show you something. I took you to the top of SpaceX. They're going to launch a missile into space. I duct taped you to the top of SpaceX. I come here to Code of Ethics. So I just typed in code of ethics. I went to the California Association, that's the person sitting on a house. You type in the words in search, code of ethics. You say, okay, yeah, I click on this and it takes me to the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics. Yes. If you scroll down a little, it talks about code of ethics violators. If you click on that, oh yeah, we got to sign in. Do we have enough usernames and passwords? You want some extras? I got extras. It talks about, here are code of ethics violators. If you violate the code of ethics, the Border Association bylaws, or the MLS bylaws, your picture will be printed and what you did as a violation. You're on what I call the wall of shame, and it stays here for 3 years. If you don't want to be on the wall of shame, do not study the Code of Ethics, Border Association bylaws, or the MLS bylaws. You have to know this stuff in order not to be posted here. And if you don't give them a picture, then you're kicked out of the association immediately. You must provide a picture. Just talking to you here about what that's why I joined these committees, because I wanted to make sure that I knew what the board bylaws were, what the MLS bylaws were, so that I wouldn't be in violation. And I could tell my agents underneath my license, don't get involved in this. All right. In the words of a famous real estate attorney, go out there and sell something. I need the money. See you in the next class.